All right. Good morning, everyone. All right. It's good to see you all. When I was growing up, middle school and high school, we actually had church in Boston, like for the whole state, every single Sunday. So we would come here, and I sang in the choir then, so we'd get here pretty early. So it's nice to be back. I have a lot of warm memories here. Let me make sure I'm all set up. Okay. So today I wanted to talk to you guys about some things that I found insightful and helpful. I'm going to talk about a perspective for joy. So in the Divine Principle, the main textbook that explains the teachings of Reverend and Mrs. Moon, the first part of the book addresses the question, what is the purpose of life? So this is a really big question, it's really important, and people do crazy things to try to figure out the answer to this question, like quitting school or their job and living in a van and fundraising across the country, What is the answer that we learn from the Divine Principle? The purpose of life is joy, right? It seems like such a simple answer, but appearances can be deceiving. The first sentence of the Divine Principle, says it well. Everyone is struggling to attain happiness and avoid misfortune. Very true words. So we know the purpose of life is joy, and people have been trying to find joy for thousands of years, So how do we find this joy? There are lots of kinds of joy, lots of kinds of happiness. We can find joy in buying new clothes and feeling confident, right? We find happiness from working hard and passing that exam. There's the joy of getting a promotion, or hang out with your friends. There's all kinds of great highs that we can experience. But, that's what they are. They're kind of temporary highs, right? We can't hang on to those joys, and they don't last us through our life, right? And even if we were able to hang out with our friends all the time, 24/7, probably the amount of happiness you get from that would go down a little bit, just a little bit. So the joy that we're seeking to really fulfill our lives is not temporary highs, right? The joy that we're looking for is a deep and continuous peace and contentment, something that can be lasting, something that's true. So we will have joyful experiences in our life, right? When you look into the eyes of the person you love on your wedding day, or when you get into that college that you really wanted to, or when you hold your child in your arms for the first time, that is pure joy, right? But we also are going to face challenges in our life, and that's a given. Even in the ideal world, we are going to be challenged. So true joy is not automatic, but something that has to be worked for, because anything worthwhile doesn't come easily, right? But it is worth fighting for. So the biggest obstacle, it seems, to joy is suffering. Yet when we can find peace and contentment, even beauty in suffering, we will be able to find true joy. A while back, I listened to an audiobook that I highly recommend called The Book of Joy. It's written by Douglas Abrams, who is a journalist who interviewed the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu together on the importance of joy. So I'm sure you guys all know, but the Dalai Lama, he is the spiritual head of the Tibetan Buddhism, right, who was exiled from his country, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, he worked to end apartheid in South Africa. He worked with Nelson Mandela. So both of them have experienced and witnessed firsthand incredible tragedies and suffering, and both of them have worked their whole lives to try to, end those tragedies or to fix them. So it was really interesting hearing their perspective about joy. When we think about all the horrible things that are happening in this world, it can be really hard to even think should I even be joyful? When all this terrible things are happening. But it was a very good book. So at the end of the book, they go through 8 pillars of joy. So those pillars are perspective, humility, humor, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. So today I just want to focus on perspective, which just so happens to be the first thing Lucifer failed to understand when he was trying to find happiness. You know, when we look back to the creation story of Adam and Eve, a lot of the times we're studying that so that we can understand the root of our troubles, right? Our bad habits and culture that have been passed down from generation to generation. But the creation story starts before Adam and Eve were created. It begins with God wanting to experience joy through give and take, right? So he has this vision to create a world for and his children so that he can have a relationship. So first he creates the angels, who then help God to make creation. And Lucifer is one of his right-hand angels and works tirelessly for God. Then Adam and Eve are created. God is elated and in love, and Lucifer recognizes that as his children, Adam and Eve were loved by God differently than himself. Lucifer was happy for God and realized that he could also find happiness from Adam and Eve as they got to know and trust each other. Wait a minute, that's not what happened, right? So Lucifer perceived that God was loving Adam and Eve more, and Lucifer became jealous. And we know the rest, so I'm not going to continue. But the first fallen nature listed in the divine principle is failing to take God's standpoint. This created a snowball of unhappiness as Lucifer then felt and acted on his selfish and narrow point of view. So perspective is really powerful business. In this book, the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop Tutu explain that joy is a byproduct of your thoughts and feelings and actions. Perspective is the way you view the world, and it affects all 3 of those aspects. So who has the biggest, widest perspective in the world? God, right? So there are 2 points that make our Heavenly Parent's perspective the widest. One is he cares about everyone. You, me, our neighbors, our friends, our foes, victims, perpetrators. And 2, he has an eternal view, right? Oh, that got kind of cut off. Anyway, eternal. So God is not just concerned about what's happening right now, but also 5 minutes from now, or a day from now, or 10 years from now, for eternity, right? Not just even this physical world. So in order to see from God's standpoint, or to take the perspective of God, we need to consider all of those points. And taking God's perspective leads us to a path of true joy. So I personally like it when messages have a practical application. So I have 3 exercises we can use to build up our perspective muscles. Things don't necessarily come easily, right? We were created so that we have to grow to perfection, right? So I'm sure there are many exercises and meditations you can use, but here are 3 that I think are simple and easy to use. So the first part, though, before doing anything, I think we need to pause and breathe, okay? Like a lot of times life can have a certain momentum, and you're just reacting and reacting and reacting, but sometimes we just need to pause, right? So we can regain control, take a deep breath. Remember that breath is filled with air that God created for you. God created you so you could experience joy. Okay, let's think about God's perspective. So the first exercise is we need to recognize that others are suffering and struggling too. Especially those that may be causing us to suffer, and we need to take time to bless them. So we're going to watch this short video. Oh, where's the video? Did they pass it? Okay, here we go. Okay. When I was preparing the sermon the first time, I showed this video to my mom. I was like, oh, this is a great video to show perspective. And my mom was like, I don't get it. So if you're there right now, bear with me. So the creator of this short movie played with perspective on a lot of levels, right? Like visually. But so this man comes out of his house and he sees an alien, right? So what is his initial perspective of the situation? Fear. Yeah, this is a dangerous alien. I need to protect myself, right? So, and then what action does he take? What does he go get? He gets his gun and tries to shoot the alien. It doesn't work. But then at the end of the video, his perception changes, right? What is his perception of this alien now? A cute little guy, someone who is suffering, right? Being harassed by his dog. And what does he do then? He takes him in, maybe gives him a cup of tea, gives him a blanket to dry off, I don't know. But it's interesting because even at the beginning of the film, when he sees the alien and he reacts in fear, the alien is larger than life, right? But by the end, when he recognizes that the alien is someone who is also suffering, going through things, that alien becomes smaller and is much easier to relate to, right? So which perspective do you think led to more joy for this man? The second one, right? Because now maybe he has a new friend. He's definitely not just cowering in fear anymore, right? So currently I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I work part-time from home. And my daughter just turned 3 years old. She's hilarious and cute. Any parents in here remember their kids when they were 3? There's a lot of entertaining things that go on, for sure. But there are times when, she can be quite frustrating. She's getting quite a stubborn streak right now. And as a toddler, she doesn't have complete mastery of the English language. So she's not always able to communicate her needs. And a lot of the times she doesn't even know what those needs are. Her favorite answer to question is no, right? So, there are times when she can get right on the edge of my nerve, and it's usually when I'm in the middle of doing something, so I'm already a little bit stressed, right? So I'll be cooking dinner, or making phone calls, or writing emails, or writing a sermon, and she comes up and, Mama, I want cereal. Kaya, you had cereal for breakfast, and lunch, and snack, and dinner's in 10 minutes, okay? You have to wait. Mama, I want cereal. Mama, I want cereal. And she'll repeat that for like a million more times. And, in my head, I'm like, just leave me alone. I just need to get this done, and then I can take care of you, right? But anyway, losing my cool usually does not help the situation. She'll usually start crying, and at some point, I need to pause, and I take a deep breath, and I reframe the situation in my mind, right? She is tired and hungry and doesn't know how to communicate her needs. or how to take care of herself, and she's frustrating. So I can change how I'm feeling and how I'm acting. I can give her a hug. You poor thing, you must be really hungry. I know you really love cereal. There. And she'll keep crying, probably, for another 5 or 10 minutes. But when she's done with that, we can move on. I can give her dinner a little bit early, and then she can be happy in her playful self again, and I can go on with what I need to do. But it's just taking that time to really remember that she is not there trying to cause me misery. She is there because she's also struggling, right? Many times we like to assume that the worst of others, when they do something to inconvenience us, we like to vilify them. That person that cut you off in traffic and almost caused that accident, they're selfish jerks and shouldn't be driving on the road, right? Archbishop Tutu in the book of Joy explains that his method to deal with those people is to assume they're rushing to the hospital because a loved one is sick, and then he gives a short prayer for them and their safety. And of course, that may or may not be true, probably is not, but which is a more godly or joyful perspective, right? Who is the more peaceful, content person? The one who's praying or the one who's cursing? So even if you are right, that person is selfish and they're not a nice person, that in itself is still cause to have sympathy for them, right? If you're completely self-absorbed, you probably don't have great relationships with other people. They're not finding true happiness themselves. We can still pray for them nonetheless, right? So, of course, these might seem like small examples, right? But how we perceive and act on the small levels is really practice for how we can act with larger problems. When we look at Reverend Moon, he was placed in prison camp in North Korea, right? He experienced horrible things there. And yet his attitude, his whole life with North Korea, was he was always trying to reach out, right? And to create peace. He didn't just hold on to that grudge of him having to experience all that suffering from them. He recognized that they are also struggling and they are suffering and we're in this together. So, we want to recognize that others are suffering too and take some time to bless them. Whether that means having a meaningful conversation with that person, just being present, or giving a quick prayer for them. It can be just something really small, but it helps to broaden our perspective. In the next exercise, think about your suffering and then think about all the other people going through the same thing, because we are not alone. So remember when we talked about the purpose of life being joy? Well, joy was designed so that we feel it when we have good give and take, right? Relationships, all that object partner, subject partner stuff that the Divine Principle and Reverend and Mrs. Moon talk about all the time is important because joy does not come in a vacuum. We're meant to relate to each other as friends, as brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, husband and wife, children of God. If we can't connect to others, we can't find true joy. So remember, our thoughts and our feelings affect how we talk and act. Our perspective is so powerful that it even affects us physically. Dr. Larry Sherwitz conducted a study where he counted the usage of first-person singular pronouns participants used when talking and was able to correlate it to heart disease. So I'm going to read a little excerpt from his study. Colleagues and I discovered the self-involvement heart disease link when we conducted a study with type A individuals, meaning people who tend to be impatient and angry. Not only did self-involved people self-reference a lot, the more their responses were filled with I, me, my, and mine, the higher their blood pressure and stress levels. Hostility, depression, and anxiety rose, all known risk factors for heart disease. When we looked closer, the connection became even more clear. Self-involved subjects, 1, had more blocked coronary arteries, 2, were more likely to have a second heart attack, and 3, were more likely not to survive a heart attack. The pronoun most strongly linked with heart disease, my. So just to be clear, this is not saying that people who have heart disease because they're self-involved, okay? This is saying that being self-involved, being focused on yourself, increases the risk, can affect you physically even. You know, in difficult situations, we can get wrapped in our own survival. You know, we can get into survival mentality. But it's really important to realize you're not the only one in that position. You're not the only one struggling through this. I was really moved when I was reading Reverend Moon's autobiography, his experience in Hungnam prison. I'm going to read a few excerpts from there, okay? So the pain of hunger can only be known by those who have experienced it. When a person is hungry, a mere grain of rice becomes very precious. Even now, it makes me tense just to think of Hungnam. It's hard to believe that a single grain of rice can give such stimulation to the body. But when you are hungry, you have such a longing for food that it makes you cry. When a person has a full stomach, the world seems big. But to a hungry person, a grain of rice is bigger than the earth. A grain of rice takes on enormous value to someone who is hungry. Beginning with my first day in prison, I made it a habit to take half of my ration of rice and give it to my fellow prisoners, keeping only half for myself. I trained myself this way for 3 weeks and then ate the whole ration. This made me think that I was eating enough rice for 2 people, which made it easier to endure the hunger. The most valued possession in prison after food was a needle and thread. Our clothes would wear out and be torn during hard labor, but it was difficult to get a needle and thread to mend them. After a while, prisoners began to look like beggars in rags. It was very important to mend the holes in our clothes in order to block even a little the cold winter winds. A small piece of cloth found lying on the road was extremely valuable. Even if the cloth were covered with cow dung, the prisoners would fight each other to try to pick it up. Once, as I was carrying the bags of fertilizer, I discovered a needle stuck in one of the bags. It must have been left there accidentally when the bag was made. From that time on, I became the tailor of Hungnam prison. It was such a joy to find that needle. Every day, I mended pants and knee breeches for other prisoners. So Reverend Moon was really in a situation there about survival, right? A lot of people were placed in this prison camp on 3-year sentences, knowing that they weren't going to survive those sentences. And most people would be consumed by that instinct to just survive, right? But here we see that Reverend Moon understand that everyone in this prison camp was going through the same thing, right? And being able to, you know, he had that needle and thread and he sewed clothes for other people, right? Not just for himself. And he didn't use this desired tool to get things from other people, right? He says, it was a joy to find that needle. Every day I mended pants and knee breeches for other prisoners. So having that mentality that we're all in this together, where other people are going through the same thing, that wider perspective, made life in prison camp more bearable. So having a perspective that isolates you is not healthy for you physically or spiritually. Sometimes when things are very difficult, it might feel like you're alone. But again, take a breath, pause, and take some time to reflect and recognize that others have the same struggles as you, and you'll not be alone. And many times, even just recognizing that can give you more strength. Because if other people have the same struggles that you are going through, and other people in the past have had the same struggles and they've gotten through, right, you can too. So these past 2 exercises have focused on broadening our perspective by considering others. And this last exercise is to help us broaden our perspective considering time. So think of something bad that happened in the past, then think of all the good that came of it. In the Book of Joy, the Dalai Lama talks about his experience being exiled from his country. It was surely a traumatic experience having to flee one's own country when the Chinese took over Tibet. So many of the Buddhist nuns and monks suffered terrible fates at the hand of the Chinese military, and religious freedom was denied. However, the Dalai Lama explains that being exiled from his country has allowed him to meet many extraordinary people that he wouldn't have normally met. If he had remained in Tibet, he would have led a much quieter life. He probably would have remained in seclusion there. Instead of dwelling on the pain, the Dalai Lama focuses on the goodness. And that doesn't make him passive. He's still fighting for the liberation of Tibet, his home country, but he hasn't let the experience of exile turn him into an angry and vengeful person. As a young child, my sister was very sick and passed away. She was 9, I was 11. My parents had to deal with people who were afraid of my sister, as if her handicaps were contagious or it was our fault that she was that way. And my parents had to constantly fight for my sister's rights. Yet, we also met so many wonderful people, nurses, physical therapists, and many others along that journey. And I think this experience taught me a lot about compassion. Our family became stronger as we recognized that life in this physical world is fleeting, and we need to take care of each other while we can. So this exercise is not meant to give a reason to your suffering. To be honest, I don't always think there is a reason. But beauty can arise from the pain given time. When we look back at difficult situations in our life, we recognize that we survived, we made it through, we solved a problem, or we learned something. We need to know that will happen to our problems today. And we need to know that God created us for eternity. We are eternal beings, and our happiness is not just tied to this physical, earthly life alone. God has not given up on creating the kingdom of heaven, despite thousands of years of suffering. God's eternal perspective allows him to persevere, and we can do the same. So life can be so busy. Students, I know every morning you wake up, get ready for school, you go to school, and every single second of that day is scheduled, right? And you come home, you might have some extracurricular activities, you eat dinner, you do homework, you go to bed, and repeat, right? And adults, it's the same thing, right? We wake up, make sure our kids are ready for school, we go to work, we come home, make dinner, do the laundry, you're trying to make sure that you're keeping a healthy marriage and also a healthy relationship with your kids and doing stuff for the church. All these responsibilities and task lists can really pile up. But as it's getting stressful, we need to pause and take a deep breath again. That breath was filled with air that God made for you. Remember that. Use that breath to remind you about God and God's perspective. And let's reframe our perspective. Others are suffering. There are people experiencing the same suffering as you, and you can get through this. You are an eternal being. The purpose of our life is joy. And joy comes from our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Perspective shapes our view of the world. And by seeing from God's perspective, caring for others, and thinking of eternity, we can find true joy, even amidst suffering. We went over 3 exercises to help develop our godly perspective. And I challenge each of you this week to try at least one when you're starting to get stressed. And then you can tell me how it goes next week, because I'll be here. And I really love your feedback. See if it really helps you to really ground yourself and focus yourself and find more peace. So thank you for your time and opening up your hearts to this message. And I wish you a life of joy. And please join me in prayer. Our dearest Heavenly Parent, thank you for this day. We had a beautiful snowfall last night that was gorgeous to wake up to, not necessarily so fun to drive through, but I want to thank you for helping everyone to get here safely today. And I want to thank you for all of these wonderful people in this room who have all been on unique journeys to find your love and to find true joy. And everyone here has so much to offer. I pray that we can open our hearts to you and open our minds to you so that as life gets difficult, we can really keep a big picture in our mind and remember to be there for others and that others are there for us and that we can really create a community of support and love, a community where you can truly be present. I invite you to be here today and to be with all of us in our hearts as we go about this week. And I hope that we can really try to find joy in all of the small parts of our life and to find you in all of the details of our life. I'd like to offer this prayer in all of our names and in my name, Arlena and Takanari Suzuki of Blessed Central Family, Jew.